She should get the least. She was never around for Dad anyway. That was the first sentence Nicole heard when the lawyer opened the will. Her cousin smirked, her aunt nodded in agreement, and her brother avoided eye contact. Nicole's hands trembled, not from shock, but from rage. She had wiped her father's mouth as he lay dying. She had held his hand through every appointment. She was the one who fed him soup when he couldn't lift a spoon. But now they painted her as the daughter who ran away and didn't care. And yet none of them knew the truth. Nicole held the real will. If you've ever been betrayed by the ones who should have stood by you, stick around. Like, subscribe and drop a comment if family secrets have ever come back to bite hard. Nicole Sanderson was never the loud one at family dinners. The second daughter of Harold Sanderson, a man whose name was once respected across the county, she had always been the quiet observer. While her relatives fought over heirlooms and favors, Nicole focused on her small teaching job, her garden, and her father's failing health. When Harold's condition worsened, she moved back to his old ranch to care for him full-time, leaving behind the comfort of her city life. It wasn't easy. Dementia mood swings and long nights at the hospital broke her down, but she stayed. She always stayed. Meanwhile, her cousins and siblings stayed away, only showing up when they needed money or a signature. And now, after her father's passing, they were all gathered like vultures in his old study, ready to divide everything he owned. The will they heard was read aloud by a family lawyer who had no idea what Nicole carried in her purse, a handwritten letter from her father, sealed and signed and trusted to her before he passed. But how did Nicole become the outcast in her own family? And why did everyone believe she abandoned her father? Let's go back to where it all began. Nicole wasn't always the daughter who left. In fact, she had once been her father's favorite quiet observant and endlessly loyal. As a child, she followed him through the fields of their ranch, learning the difference between good soil and stubborn land, how to tie a gate, how to feel the weather in her bones. Harold Sanderson never said much, but Nicole didn't need him to. His silence was comforting, until it wasn't. It started when Nicole turned 15 and began to question the dynamics in their home. Her mother, a stern woman with rigid values, often praised Nicole's older brother Mark for his ambition, even as he barely passed his classes. Nicole, who brought home straight A's, was told not to make a big deal about it. You don't need a medal for doing what's expected. Her mother snapped once when Nicole excitedly showed her an acceptance letter to a statewide science program. The message was clear. Be quiet, be useful, don't ask for praise. By the time she graduated high school, Nicole had grown used to being invisible. She worked 2 jobs to afford college after her parents said they couldn't help financially just weeks after buying Mark a new car. Still, she didn't complain. She told herself she was building independent strength. But deep inside, a bitter seed had been planted. She was never enough for her family, not loud enough, not needy enough, not cruel enough. At 23, Nicole moved to the city and cut contact for 2 years, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Her anxiety had become unbearable, and she needed to breathe. Therapy helped, so did distance. But then the call came. Her father had collapsed during a cattle inspection. The doctors found a mass in his brain. He was diagnosed with stage 4 glioblastoma. 6 months, they said, maybe less. Her brother was in the middle of launching a tech startup and couldn't be pulled away. Her aunts had too much going on. Nicole didn't hesitate. She packed her life and moved back to the ranch. It was supposed to be temporary. But Harold declined quickly, losing track of days and names. Some nights he screamed, convinced he was still young and at war with someone only he could see. Other nights he sobbed like a child. Anne called Nicole Maggie, her mother's name. She bathed him, fed him, fought with the hospice team when they grew careless. But when the rest of the family visited sporadically, and only when they wanted to discuss estate planning, they never acknowledged her role. She's just trying to earn her share, one aunt whispered once, thinking Nicole couldn't hear. She's been gone for years. Suddenly, she's Florence Nightingale. Another chimed in. Nicole said nothing. She had learned long ago that in her family, speaking up only made them call you dramatic, but the weight of the disrespect chipped away at her. Every day she swallowed the rage until it turned into something sharper resolve. She began documenting everything. Doctor's notes, care logs, conversations. At first, it was just for legal clarity, in case anyone tried to twist the facts. But deep down, she knew they would twist everything. Her family didn't value truth. They valued appearances. And Nicole no longer cared to play their game. The turning point came 2 weeks before Harold died. He was lucid for an hour, one clear, blessed hour. He called Nicole to his bedside and asked her to open a drawer. Inside was a folded envelope. "I changed it," he said. "The will. It's not fair what they've done. I want you to have the ranch. I want you to make something beautiful with it." But the lawyer Nicole started. "I didn't trust them anymore. This one's in my hand. You'll know what to do." She wept that night, not just for him, but for the girl she used to be, the one who only ever wanted her father to see her. And he had. In the end, he had. Harold passed quietly in his sleep the following week. Nicole buried him beneath the oak tree he planted when she was born. And then came the meeting, the gathering of relatives, the reading of a will none of them questioned. Until Nicole spoke. "I have a handwritten will," she said calmly. "Dated more recently than the one you're reading." Silence, then chaos. They accused her of forgery, of manipulation. Her cousin threatened legal action on the spot. Mark laughed coldly and said, "So this is your plan, huh?" Nurse Daddy until the end, and Cash and Nicole didn't flinch. For once, she didn't cry. She simply placed the letter on the table and let them read his words for themselves. But that was just the beginning, because what Nicole was about to face next would test every ounce of her strength. The family didn't just threaten her, they took her to court. And what followed was a legal battle fueled by lies, betrayal, and one explosive secret no one saw coming. Nicole had never stepped foot inside a courtroom before. The polished wood, the stale air, the cold stares from across the aisle. It all felt surreal. But when she stood behind the plaintiff's table holding the envelope that bore her father's final wishes, she realized something powerful. She wasn't scared anymore. Her brother Mark and the rest of the family had filed a formal challenge within a week of the funeral. Their claim: the handwritten will was a fake, that Nicole had coerced Harold while he was not of sound mind. They submitted statements claiming she was estranged, unstable, and manipulative. The irony burned her to the bone. But Nicole had come prepared. She had documentation of every doctor's visit, voice memos from nurses' surveillance footage from the front porch that captured her father walking out to greet the notary just a month before his death. Most importantly, she had a video. It was shaky, filmed on her phone, and not meant for anything official. But it showed Harold sitting upright in bed, glasses sliding down his nose, reading the handwritten will aloud. At the end, he looked directly into the lens and said, "If you're watching this and you're my family, know that Nicole was there. You weren't. She gets the ranch. And I hope one day you forgive yourselves." Gasps filled the courtroom when Nicole's lawyer played it. Mark immediately objected. "That's edited, that's fake." But their arguments were unraveling fast. And then a twist no one could have predicted: the handwriting expert. Nicole's team had hired a respected forensic document examiner to verify the will. But Mark's team brought their own expert, an older man in a beige suit who exuded smug confidence. When he was called to the stand, he confidently stated, "This document is not authentic. The stroke pressure and ink flow show inconsistency." But Nicole noticed something: his name, Doctor. "Leonard Carver," she whispered to her lawyer. "Yes," her lawyer said, confused. "He's the defense's star." Nicole's eyes narrowed. "He shouldn't be here. He was disbarred from 2 universities for fraud." They dug fast. Within a day, they uncovered documents from 2 prior court cases where Dr. Carver had falsified reports, paid testimonies in estate disputes. One case was eerily similar to Nicole's. When confronted, Carver stammered and tried to backpedal. The judge was not amused. His testimony was thrown out and the defense took a massive blow. But the real bombshell came 3 days later. A paralegal from the opposing counsel's office, young, nervous, shaking, approached Nicole's team in private. She handed them a flash drive. I can't do this anymore," she said. "They forged a will. The one they read at the funeral. It wasn't even typed on the original lawyer's stationery. They printed it at home. The flash drive contained email threads between Mark and one of their tech-savvy cousins, instructions on formatting changing dates, adding digital signatures. Nicole stared at the screen, heart pounding. They had fabricated everything. Her lawyer's face was pale. "This is criminal," he muttered. The next day in court, Nicole's team presented the emails, the flash drive, and testimony from the paralegal. It wasn't just a will dispute anymore, it was fraud, conspiracy, and tampering with estate assets. Mark's face twisted in disbelief as the judge banged the gavel and called for a recess. His lawyer whispered something to him, but Mark shook him off. Outside in the hallway, Mark caught up to Nicole. "You think this makes you noble?" he spat. "Dad gave you dirt and weeds. That ranch is worthless. You'll regret all of this when you're broke and alone." Nicole stepped in close. "I'd rather have dirt and weeds that are real than a fortune built on lies." He scoffed and walked away. The trial continued, but the tone had shifted completely. Nicole wasn't the quiet girl no one listened to anymore. She was the one who stood for truth alone, yes, but unshaken. The final witness was someone no one expected to see: Marjorie, Nicole's Aunt Harold's sister. She had flown in from Montana, claiming she wanted nothing to do with the drama. But what she said on the stand left everyone stunned. "I received a letter from Harold a month before he passed," she testified. "He told me he'd rewritten the will, said he didn't trust his own son anymore, said Nicole was the only one who never asked him for anything." She handed over the letter. It matched the handwriting in the new will. Mark stood up. "This is ridiculous." But it was over. The court ruled in Nicole's favor. The handwritten will was valid, the digital one was fraudulent, and the property along with damages were awarded to her. Outside the courtroom, Nicole exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. She had won. Not just a legal battle, but a war for her father's legacy, for her own worth. Still, one question lingered in her mind. What would she do now with the land, the ranch, and the second chance her father had given her? Nicole had earned justice, but healing was something else entirely. And the road to rebuilding her life, her peace, and the land her father left behind was just beginning. Nicole thought winning the case would bring her peace, riquillas. For a few days it did. The court's verdict had been clear. She now owned the ranch officially, legally, and unquestionably. But peace wasn't paperwork. It wasn't silence. Not when the silence was this loud. The house was too big without her father's voice. The porch too quiet without his cough echoing in the mornings. She wandered the halls at night, sometimes barefoot, sometimes clutching an old flannel that still smelled like his aftershave. But the worst came in the form of people, whispers in the grocery store, old family friends crossing the street, church members giving tight-lipped smiles. The rumor mill had started spinning, fueled by her own blood. She manipulated him. Poor Mark, all that pressure on his shoulders and nothing to show for it. She only came back for the inheritance. I heard she forged something. Got lucky the judge was sympathetic. Nicole stopped going into town. When she drove, she wore sunglasses, even on cloudy days. Even at night. She couldn't bear the eyes. But even in isolation, the wounds cut deeper. One morning, she received a letter in the mail. No return address, just her name in angry, slanted handwriting. Inside was a photo. It was a candid and old one of Nicole at 19, laughing in the backseat of a car with someone who was not her boyfriend at the time. A sticky note was attached. "Still think you're better than the rest of us." Nicole's hands trembled, not just from fear, from the realization that someone had been digging, deliberately. This wasn't about money anymore. This was vengeance. That night, as thunder rolled in over the hills, she sat in her father's old study. The room was dark except for a desk lamp. Rain pinged softly on the windows. She opened a drawer she hadn't touched since the verdict. Inside were the original papers from the court case, the last will, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope labeled "For you only if it gets hard." She stared at it for minutes, maybe hours. Then she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Nikki, I know how cruel they can be. I've seen it all my life, even as a boy. This family is good at pretending to be close, but they only circle around what they want. I didn't protect you like I should have. I let your mother belittle you. I let Mark steal the spotlight when it was you holding everything together. But I see you now. I saw you every day. And if they come for you again, remember this. They hate what they can't control, and you, my girl, were never meant to be controlled. Dad. Nicole pressed the letter to her chest and sobbed. Not the soft cinematic kind, but the ugly broken kind. The kind that makes your body shake and your breath catch in your throat. She didn't cry because of the pain. She cried because someone had finally said it. She had never been crazy, never been wrong, never been too sensitive. She had been right all along. But clarity didn't protect you from scars. In the weeks that followed, the family didn't stop. Mark filed a motion to appeal. Her cousin posted cryptic messages on social media. Some people win the war, but lose their soul. The final blow came from her job. The small teaching gig she had kept part-time remote work she loved. One day she logged in and found her access revoked. An email from the administrator read, "Due to recent concerns raised by a third party regarding your moral character, we are temporarily suspending your contract pending review." She called. No answer. 2 days later, she found out through an ex-colleague Mark had sent them the court transcripts minus the outcome, just enough to stir suspicion. Nicole stood in her driveway staring out at the fields that once felt like sanctuary. She wanted to scream. To run, to disappear again. What had all of this been for justice had cost her everything. Her peace, her reputation, her income. She looked down at her hands calloused from cleaning, from building, from carrying her father through illness. These were not the hands of someone weak, but she felt powerless. It all came to a head one night when she received a voicemail from her mother. She hadn't spoken to her in years. "Nicole, I don't know what you think you've won. That ranch will drain you dry. You think Dad wanted that place out of love? He was trapped in it. You've just inherited his prison. Mark was trying to help you. We all were. You just always had to make things harder than they had to be. Anyway, take care of yourself. Or don't. I'm tired of trying." Nicole sat on the kitchen floor, staring at the fridge, the words echoing in her head. You've inherited his prison. And in that moment, she realized that she didn't want to win anymore. She wanted to transform. This ranch wasn't a prison. It was a blank slate, a broken house waiting to become a sanctuary. And maybe, just maybe, she could turn her pain into something bigger than revenge. She stood up, wiped her face, and went to the barn. She pulled out old plans once her father had talked about, but never executed. A greenhouse, a community space, a home for people aging without support. She looked out at the land with new eyes, not as a battleground, but as a future. And so came the moment Nicole had to decide, would she live in bitterness or build something healing out of all the hurt they gave her? Nicole didn't leave the ranch for almost 3 weeks. No court dates, no errands, no visits into town. She shut it all out, her phone, her email, her so-called reputation. The world outside had been brutal. But within the worn fences of her father's land, there was still something unbroken. A silence she could reclaim. A life she could reimagine. Each day she walked the property, notebook in hand. The soil was dry, the barn needed reinforcement, the house's wiring was a fire hazard waiting to happen. But she didn't see decay anymore. She saw bones, sturdy, waiting, patient bones, and the chance to rebuild something meaningful. Still, doubt followed her. Could she really do this alone? That answer came unexpectedly in the form of a knock on her door. She opened it to find Mrs. Avery, her father's old nurse. She hadn't seen her since the funeral. "I was in town," Mrs. Avery said gently, holding a small basket of fresh bread. "He always told me if anything happened to him, I should check on you. Said you'd try to carry too much." Nicole invited her in, surprised at how comforting the woman's voice still felt. Over tea, they talked about Harold, about the trial, about the rumors. Then Mrs. Avery said something that shifted everything. "Your father once told me that the greatest tragedy of his life wasn't the cancer. It was that he didn't teach his kids how to stay, how to weather hard things without turning on each other. Nicole blinked, stunned. He thought the ranch could teach them that. Mrs. Avery continued. Teach you how to stay rooted in something bigger than pride. He hoped you'd be the one to carry that forward. The words settled into Nicole's bones like warm weight. Not a burden, but a calling. She thought of the greenhouse plans she'd found in the barn, of the empty guest house her father had built but never used, of the way the hills caught the sunrise like a promise. A plan began to form, not out of spite, but out of hope. She wouldn't sell the ranch. She wouldn't run. She would turn it into something that made staying worthwhile for others like her, for the elderly abandoned by their families, for the caretakers with no one to care for them, for the forgotten, the discarded, the misjudged. That night, Nicole sat at her father's old desk and wrote a mission statement: the Sanderson Center for Rest and Renewal, a refuge for the aging, a sanctuary for caregivers, a place where no one is ever left behind. Then she picked up the phone. First, she called her friend Ava, an architect who'd always dreamed of designing something restorative. Then a local nonprofit that helped fund rural elder care programs. Then an old college professor who now worked in community planning. Each call was a stake in the ground, a piece of her saying, I'm not going back, I'm building forward. Of course, doubt didn't vanish, but this time it didn't rule her. The next morning, Nicole walked the ranch with new eyes. She paused under the oak tree where her father was buried. Wind rustled through the branches, as if whispering encouragement. I don't need their approval, she said aloud. I never did. At long last, she believed it. Later that week, she received one final letter from her brother. No threats, no insults, just 2 lines. You win, Nicole, keep the place. Just know you were always hard to love. She stared at the note for a while. Then, without anger or sadness, she folded it once and threw it into the fireplace. Hard to love, no. Hard to manipulate. And that made all the difference. She had spent years seeking validation from people who only valued control. But now, standing tall in the home they tried to take from her, Nicole no longer needed their love to define her worth. She was home, not because it was easy, but because it was hers. With a clear decision made, Nicole began the hard work of rebuilding one fence post, one beam, one broken soul at a time. Nicole moved fast. Within 2 months, construction on the Sanderson Center for Rest and Renewal had begun. The dilapidated guest house was torn down and rebuilt as a multi-room care lodge with wide porches, accessible ramps, and warm earth-toned interiors. The old barn became a community greenhouse. Volunteers came, nurses, retired teachers, even a carpenter who said his own mother had died alone in a nursing home. Nicole welcomed them all. Local press picked up the story. Estranged daughter turns inherited ranch into refuge for abandoned elders. Suddenly, the same people who had whispered about her began sending emails asking to donate. Some even asked to volunteer, and then came the moment she hadn't expected, but fully welcomed. Mark was subpoenaed. The forged will, once dismissed as just a bad idea, was now a criminal matter. Charges included fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to tamper with legal documents. The court offered him a deal: confess, pay a heavy fine, and avoid jail. He took it, but the damage was done. His startup lost funding. Partners pulled out. His reputation shattered. Nicole didn't gloat. She didn't even respond when reporters reached out for comment. Success was her statement. Meanwhile, her mother sent another letter, this one shorter than the last. I hear you've turned it into something. Don't expect praise. Nicole smiled as she tore it in half. At the center's grand opening, Nicole stood beneath the oak tree where her father rested. A crowd gathered, clapping as she cut the ribbon. She spoke simply. This land held pain. Now it will hold healing. She didn't mention Mark or the lawsuit. She didn't have to. Because everyone who once doubted her now saw exactly who she was and what they lost when they pushed her away. But even victory needed closure, and before Nicole could truly move on, there was one final message left to deliver. 1 year later, Nicole stood at the top of the hill behind the ranch, watching the sun dip low over the land she almost lost. There was no courtroom now, no cruel whispers, just the wind in the trees' laughter from the porch below, and the quiet rhythm of a life she had chosen on her terms. She was no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, not to Mark, not to her mother, not even to the ghosts of her past. She had built something sacred, not from revenge, but from reclamation. And in doing so, she discovered something powerful. You don't have to be loved by the wrong people to know your worth. Nicole had drawn her boundaries, spoken her truth, and planted something lasting where there had once been only grief. That was freedom. That was peace. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was home. If you've ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or underestimated, remember Nicole's story. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to choose peace over approval. Share your thoughts below. Subscribe for more true healing stories like this. Your voice matters.